Chair, yeah. I'll let you know when we start.
Good evening and welcome to this evening's virtual planning meeting. By virtue of the regulations introduced by the government, I am Councillor Dean and I will be chairing the meeting this evening. The regulations have temporarily removed the legal requirement for local authorities to hold meeting in person. It will enable councils to make effective and transparent decisions on the delivery of services for residents. The requirement for public meetings to be made accessible to the public remains, and the link to the virtual meeting is available on the council website in the usual live meeting link page. If a connection to a member is lost during this meeting, I will stop to enable reconnection to be restored. If the connection cannot be restored within a reasonable time, the meeting will proceed, but the member who has been disconnected will not be able to vote on the matter under discussion, as they would not have heard all the facts. Should any aspect of the external link fail, I may call a short adjournment of up to a few minutes, or so to determine whether the connection can quickly be restored or re-established, either by video technology or phone to the alternative. If the connection is not restored within that time, the meeting will be adjourned and any further business will not proceed until another date and time. Any public questions probably submitted to the meeting during this period will be read out by myself and answered at the meeting. Firstly, can I ask the clerk to ask members to confirm their attendance?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Akhtar.
Present.
Councillor Davis.
Present.
Councillor Gary.
Present.
Councillor Gloucester.
Oh, sorry, present.
Councillor Hewitt.
Present.
Councillor Ibrahim.
Present.
Councillor Iqbal. I don't think Councillor Iqbal is with us at the moment. Councillor Jakes.
Present.
Councillor Malik.
Present.
Councillor Fithian.
Present.
Councillor Sheldon.
Present.
Councillor Serjan.
Present.
Councillor Williamson. Councillor Dean.
Present.
Sean, you've missed me off, Councillor.
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, Councillor Hartness. I did, didn't I? Sorry. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. When the committee comes to take a vote on any item, each member will be individually asked to state whether they are for, against or abstaining. We also have officers in attendance from Planning and Legal and Constitutional Services. If we can now turn to the agenda, and for the benefit of those members of the public watching, the full agenda pack is available on the council website. The pack also includes the slides that will be presented this evening. Item 1, do we have any apologies for absence?
We've received one, Chair.
Sorry?
We have no apologies, Chair.
All right, thank you. Do we have any items of any urgent business? I've received none.
No, Chair.
Do members? No. Do any members wish to declare any interests?
Councillor Dean, if I could just, I've read through the presentation pack and I haven't read through all the appeals at the end. I'm not sure if my name doesn't appear there. So if that's so, if I don't take part at the end, will that be all right?
That'll be fine, Chair.
Yeah, that'll be fine.
Thank you.
Yeah. Right. We've received no public questions that I'm aware of.
No, Chair.
And have any, sorry, we've got the minutes of the previous meeting before us. I think there's one amendment that we want to make, and that's register Councillor Gary's attendance. With
Yes,
that amendment, are we agreed that they're a correct one?
Agreed.
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Right, if we then moved on to item 6, which is the substantive item we have before us today, and it's an application from regarding the building of the Oldham, ex-Oldham County Court, 122 Rochdale Road, and that's to change it into 43 apartments. And could I invite the planning officer to introduce the item?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll see if I can get the presentation up for you. Hopefully you can now see the opening page. Yes?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so this is obviously a building I'm sure every member must know, as it's obviously next to the main council offices. The old county court building, it's been vacant for a little while. It's had some unauthorised use in there for a short period of time as well. And obviously this is a proposal to hopefully bring it back into productive use. So the intention is to convert from the existing use into residential use. Mix of apartments, predominantly 1 bedroom, but some 2 bedroom units and a small number of studio type apartments as well. So again, that's just the site that you can see in the corner of St Mary's Way and Rochdale Road. Again, centre of the photograph, this is the building obviously that we're dealing with. As you can see, it's fairly well screened from the main road itself. Around the back of the building, you've got the parking area. So that's the main elevation. As you'll see on some of the later slides, there are some minor alterations, additional windows, but generally it retains the character of the existing building. This is the area around the back of the building. Blurred view from St Mary's Way. Again, back of the building. Just one point just to make there, at the moment, as you see, just at the bottom to the left of centre is the area where the existing office block has its waste and refuse storage. That's the area which is also allocated under the revised proposals for that particular facility to be provided. So to say, building itself, landscaping front elevations, the existing car park, clearly limited number of spaces available within the car park, but this is a town centre location. It's clearly highly sustainable, obviously near to public transport connections and to shops, offices and so forth. Given that particular circumstance, it's considered that even though there is far fewer than the number of units proposed, it's a suitable alternative use for the property. And I suppose even when the court would have been in its previous use, the demand associated with the court would have far exceeded what was in the parking area at the back of the site. Some of these little round things in there, that's part of the improved landscaping within them to just soften up those areas. In terms of the elevations, just quickly run through these. You can see the top ones are the existing, proposed one lower down. You can see that obviously in order to get adequate light into the various units, some additional windows reflecting the existing style have been added, and some roof lights and small dormer type windows in the roofscape as well. Similar impact on the other elevations. Again, just opening up some of the previous openings. Similar arrangement. You can just see some of the additional landscaping there on the right, bottom right. Obviously, these are very blurred, but again, giving you an indication of the various units. Each of these has obviously got light, got aspects which can get adequate light into the units. As I say, predominantly 1 bedrooms, there's a few, just like here on the corner, a couple of 2 bedroom units in there. And again, these pretty blurred, but giving you that particular impression. Right, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Has anybody got any member got any questions of the officers? Councillor Gloucester? Sorry, Councillor Gary, I've got.
Sorry, there's 2. It looks very squashed. What are the size of the flats? That's one question. And the other question was, I noticed that we refused planning for HMO. Do you know HMO? Do you know why?
On the first question, the size of flats, all these flats meet the national space standards. So there's been some, I think a few of the units were amended as part of the scheme. Obviously the scale of the drawings doesn't help, but they all do meet the minimum standards. In terms of the HMO, there were other issues. Obviously, first of all, that was an unauthorised use of the building, and there were other issues associated with the licensing and the quality of the accommodation that was being provided in there. Clearly, this is for self-contained units. Obviously, it's not the same element of it. So yes, it was unauthorised, and the standard of accommodation, the various elements of improvement that would have been needed on that.
Thank you.
Councillor Akhtar.
Thank you, Chair. It was just similar to Councillor Gary, I've got a few concerns about overdevelopment. And in terms of, you said, Graham, that they meet the national space sort of standards. Do they just about meet those standards, or do they go beyond that? And my last question is around, the actual, the bin space. Is that going to be screened, or is it going to be visible from Radcliffe Street and from Rochdale Road itself? Okay.
In terms of the size of flats, yes, I think the answer to the first part is that generally they will meet the standards. This is not a spacious development. I think one of the elements that obviously I hadn't mentioned so far, but it's in the report, is about the viability of the scheme. And clearly there are benefits in introducing residential accommodation into the town centre. I mean, this is part of the ambition to try and bring further life back in there. This could, in theory, act as a precedent for that to bring forward. But they're clearly, in terms of the spaciousness of the units, where they are, the potential price of those units and so forth, the rental of those units, all has to come into play. And clearly the applicant has looked at where the potential demand will be for units, and these are the types of units which are the result of that exercise. So yes, it was always nice to have a higher standard of accommodation, but ultimately it meets the minimum standards, and on that basis there's not really a reason that can be justified to refuse the application. In terms of the bins, at the moment it's effectively a kind of caged area just with a fence around it. I'm not sure about the details of what's around there, but we can, one, either check that, or two, if it's not proposed, that we get something like a timber screen, solid timber screen around there. We can certainly add that as a condition if that's not shown on one of the existing drawings for approval. As you know, there's a condition on that relates to obviously the provision of the bin store. At very least, we can tweak that to ensure that it's a screened area as well.
Can I come back on that, Peter?
Yeah, London.
Obviously, I mean, I would prefer some kind of condition, but to be honest with you, I still have some sort of concerns about the standard, because obviously it's a prime site, and it's not about meeting sort of, they say they're going off demand, but there's got to be certain standards that we've got to adhere, well, we've got to ask for as well. I know that in terms of this particular application, it might be difficult to refuse it, but it's something that we need to think about. And whilst other members will have some questions, I'll have a think about in terms of what we can and can't do in those circumstances. And my last issue is around, I know in the past we used to have a lot of demand for office space in the town centre. Is that demand still there? And then lastly, in terms of space standard is, I mean, the doors were sort of developed a few years ago, and in terms of the pandemic, those space standards need to change, because a lot of people will have to work from home And if that's what they're sort of having sort of people in there who are economically active, then they need to take that into account as well.
Okay, I think the elements of that really, in terms of the office demand, the information that we've got available indicates that there isn't a great office demand in the area, and you'll see this elsewhere in the town centre, where many of particularly the upper floors of buildings are being converted into residential accommodation, and part of that is due to the demand or the lack of demand for the commercial use on there. Clearly this is a large building in itself, had a specific function. I don't think there is enough evidence to say that the loss of the employment use in here outweighs the benefits of bringing the building back into a productive use. In terms of the space standards, I absolutely agree that, notwithstanding the current situation, improving those standards is a vital element of what we should be moving towards. But it all comes down to what you can do with our planning application. And ultimately, we do not have a policy which sets out, for instance, a minimum standard that goes beyond the national guidelines. Even using the national guidelines, we should actually have a policy in our local plan to do that. But we've had an appeal decision that says when you're doing that assessment, these are the best available national standards that you can use, and therefore it's appropriate that so long as they meet those standards, there is no justification for saying the scheme is unacceptable. So whilst I totally agree, aspirationally, there would be a better element if these units were more spacious. That would apply to everybody and where everybody needs to live. In terms of assessing a planning application, the recommendation is really that we do not have the policy backing or national guidelines to back us up to say, no, we can refuse this application because it doesn't go beyond those minimum standards. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Harkness.
Chair, I'm sorry, I've had my hand up right since the beginning of this debate. Councillor Gloucester.
Chair, Councillor Gloucester had indicated that she wished to speak.
Do you want to let Hazel go first, Chair?
If she wishes. I mean, we've got five people with hands up, so I'm just taking them in the order that I've got them up. So if Councillor Gloucester wants to go first, fine.
Thank you, Chair. I think my issue again is the space. 43 apartments in that building is not actually, I think we've looked at applications like this previously, and through discussion we have actually managed to get them made larger. I think it was the one over, I can't remember which shop it was over, in the centre a few months ago. And I think those are the discussions that we need to be having, because this type of application is going to be coming through. And we all remember the Planning for the Future consultation that we've just taken part in. And, you know, our argument was modern slums of the future. And here it is right in front of us on the table, a modern slum of the future. And if we haven't got a policy, it's about time we got our finger out and got a policy in place to protect us against this. Thank you.
I think just to come back on that, I think, sorry, Chair, just to come back on Councillor Gloucester. Part of this is for me because if I get a load of questions, I forget what the questions are that come through. I think we're referring to, is it Church Place was the one that we were looking at. On that particular one, I think they actually came back at a later date making use of the prior approval arrangements to get smaller units back in the building. This is what we need to be aware of, that there are regulations now that allow for conversions of buildings without going through the full planning process. Thankfully, more recently for many of these conversions, government has added the requirement about adequate light into rooms, which didn't exist previously. So we can now consider that. But in terms of room sizes or dictating whether something should be a 1-bed or a 2-bed, really there's a fallback position that we again have to be aware of when we're considering these applications.
Can I just come back on that, please, Graham? So why have we not got a policy in place? Can I just ask that question, because it's never been answered? I've asked it a few times.
I'd have to go back to our policy team, because obviously, as you're aware, in terms of the local plan, which is currently in existence, obviously is of some age now. Basically, it's 10 years old. National policies have changed since then, which means that many of the policies in there carry now much lesser weight. Obviously, as they move forward, I don't know if Simon wants to make a comment on this. Really, obviously, as you're aware about the GMSF and moving policies forward for the future, within there, the delays that have happened as a result of that, and clearly, we've been looking now at how a local plan and a local policy can fit in with that, and I think those are the decisions that are still being made as to how we move forward, given that the GMSF in its present proposed state isn't going to come to fruition. So yes, we can look at those, but even so, they've still got to accord with national planning guidelines. So we've got set certain limits, and also they've got to be realistic to the market and what's out there. Otherwise, we would simply be stifling development. Full stop.
Could I bring Mr. Roberty in now?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I mean, clearly this is an issue which we can look at as part of the local plan process. In terms of the standards as they are, the simple fact is that we do have existing standards, and whilst I agree with both the previous members' comments on possibly a need to increase those because of the trend towards increased home working. I agree with Graham that, yes, that is something we may well need to do, but the fact is that we haven't got those revised standards in place. We have existing standards, and the proposed development complies with those standards. Therefore, we would not have any justification to actually refuse this application because it does meet those standards.
Councillor Harkness.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I share the concerns that Shoaib and Hazel and so on have raised on the standards, the space standard. I want to just turn a bit to the fact that the building is in a good state of repair. We've talked about the ambitions for the town centre being a desirable and therefore a location which has got a demand. They're very small properties. So if this is a highly sustainable location, I'm still a bit confused as why there's no contribution at all to the public open space or affordable housing. Now, if we did have that policy in place, which Simon just mentioned, then this development would have less apartments or studios in there. Bearing that in mind, I think I can't understand why there's no attempt to put any of these up for affordable housing when these clearly should be.
Okay, well, I think the answer to that is obviously this is a commercial scheme. As part of the application, the applicant has submitted a viability appraisal, which indicates obviously what available funds there would be to meet the policy requirements that we do currently have, which obviously are the affordable housing requirements and the public open space requirements. It does not indicate that if those requirements were put in place, the scheme would be a viable proposition. And my understanding is, and I might ask Simon to build on this again on this particular issue, my understanding is that the viability of it is on the edge as things stand at the moment as well. So clearly, we can ask for these. Those are the policies. But if a development is proven not to be viable, if those requirements were put in place, that overrides the benefit, the deficiencies, if you like, that might otherwise exist in the development, because it does bring forward basically practical reuse of an otherwise vacant building.
Councillor Eldon. Councillor Sheldon.
You're muted.
I wasn't muted. Somebody must have muted me there. Sorry about that. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a comment and just clarification for myself, really, as one of the newer members on the committee. 43 dwellings, and I was trying to look on the map, and it looks to be about 8 to 10 car parking spaces. Is that enough? Is that the requirement we would expect? Although some are one-bedroom dwellings, there could be a car at each dwelling. And knowing the area as we all do, coming to the civic centre, there's double yellow lines on Rochdale Road. There's not a lot of parking other than paid parking nearby. Thank
Shall
you.
I answer this, Chair? Wendy?
Yes, please.
Yeah. I've taken the view, I know there are only 8 parking spaces, but there are no national or local parking standards. So I have to assess each application on its own merits. We're in a highly sustainable location with the bus station and Metrolink, access to walking and cycling, and I've asked for cycle storage facilities. The effect on the actual highway, if residents are unable to park, will be minimal because of the waiting restrictions. So part of my job is assessing the effect on the highway, and would any additional on-street parking be detrimental to highway safety? Well, it wouldn't, because they can't nobody would be able to legally park if they required more than the 8 parking spaces. For short-term parking, there are public car parks nearby. So I took the view that anybody who wanted to live in the flats would know in advance whether they had a parking space or not, and then would make the arrangements.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Gary.
Yeah, sorry, but so the potentially 86 people could be living in that property. I noticed that we've checked, like with highways and the police, etc. Have we checked? I assume that we've checked with the fire brigade for safety purposes in case there was a fire. Take it to satisfy like safety standards.
Yeah, through your chair, regardless obviously of the planning situation, as you all will be aware, there will be other legislation they'll need to comply with, including the building regulations, and it's under the building regulations that they will be required obviously to ensure that adequate methods of escape from fire, provision of smoke alarms and so forth are provided within the building. Planning can't replicate other legislation in that sense. So yes, even if committee say yes to this tonight, it's not the end of it. They will still need to ensure they can comply with those relevant regulations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Malley.
Thank you, Chair. My question is around the refuse area. We're talking about 43 apartments here. What's the regulation for per apartment? Are they going to get 2 bins each? If they have 2 bins each, if the apartment have 2 bins each, is the refuse area big enough, or is it going to be screened all of it? Because we're talking about 86 bins. So were to put 86 bins outside, is the refuse area big enough, and is it going to be fully screened? Because it's in the town centre, we don't want to have all these bins flying around and getting out of control. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, through your chair.
Thank you.
Yeah, the bins obviously for this type of accommodation will be communal bins, so there's not going to be individual bins per unit. And those are the ones that will be provided within that particular area, which is shown on the plan, which is essentially the area where the existing bin storage is going to be in place. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. Councillor Sergian.
Thank you, Chair. Just like to flag up a few points and ask some questions, if that's okay. So my first question is there a demand for 1 and 2 bedroom apartments in Oldham, or is it mainly more perhaps 3 and 4 bedrooms? In which case, as other members have said, maybe it'll be better utilised to have bigger apartments looking towards the future as people grow their families. So that's my first point. Second is I'd like to ask, would every apartment have a window access? As Councillor Schwab mentioned, is, you know, if people are working from home, or if they're more isolated, or if they're obviously, if we've got lockdown and restrictions, etc., then that would be a key component within an apartment. And I'd like to make sure that there are windows in every single apartment. And my third, I don't know if it's in the plans, but I don't see plans for lifts and anywhere. Or maybe it's too blurred for me to see it, but if you could clarify them points for me, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, in terms of the demand element of it, there's clearly a demand for this kind of smaller accommodation. There's a demand obviously as well in the borough for much larger family accommodation, but clearly this is a building, it's a town centre building. It's not really ever going to be appropriate as family accommodation, simply because of the fact that of the nature of the area. There's no public open space in the immediate vicinity. You've got busy major roads outside. So it's serving a particular demand. And I suppose it goes back to the parking side of things as well, is that its town centre location is more likely to attract people who can make use of the public transport, who want to be in the town centre either to work or for leisure and so forth. So there is a demand, there's clearly a demand, because elsewhere in the borough we see demand for this type of accommodation coming forward. Family accommodation, yes, but perhaps not really suitable in this location, where you don't have obviously you have the gardens and so on for children obviously to play in there. Yes, each of the flats has got adequate windows to serve those, and obviously that's part of the reason why, as you saw in the elevational changes, that's what they've been putting into place on the building really. So it does provide, as you say, it could be better, it could always be better, but it provides a suitable standard of accommodation to the building. I suspect there is a lift, and yes, there is. I can just see it now. So there is a lift provided. I think again under the building regulations, they would undoubtedly, for 4 stories of accommodation, need the lift. It's on where I mentioned where the bin store area is. It's on the New Radcliffe Street elevation. There's an area again. I don't know if you can. It's got a cross on it.
Is it where it's marked X next to the? Yeah. Okay, I see it now.
There's a cross on it. That's where the lift is, and there is in fact another lift right at the far end of the building. So right in the top corner.
Each side is there.
Corner, yeah.
Okay.
So there's clearly they've ensured that there is provision for access to the upper floors.
Oh, thank you, Graham.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gary, do you want to come back? Your hand's still up.
Apologies, Chair.
Councillor Gloucester, do you want to? No?
I've taken it down, Chair, sorry.
Thank you. Right, I can't see anybody else with questions. If not, thank you, Mr. Dickman. Do you think we could go into a debate on the application? We have no speakers either for or against the application, so we're actually in a debate up to decision making now. So I don't know whether anybody wants to contribute. Councillor Jakes.
Yeah, thanks. I agree with what everybody said, but I also think that we've got to really keep in mind the need for our housing supply, and the fact that, you know, we've got a huge number of houses to provide in the borough. And if we're serious about making our town centre somewhere where people want to live, I think we've got to really consider these developments, provided that they are suitable housing for everybody. I mean, this is like 10 minutes walk from like several lovely green spaces in the borough. You can literally walk down to northern routes from there. So it has got advantages in the actual place it is. I just think that we need to make sure that the houses are adequate and fit to live in.
Thank you. Councillor Akhtar.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted some advice in terms of, can we not go back to the applicant and ask them to look at the actual space standards and see if they can actually increase them? I mean, I'm not saying that we refuse the application, but any opportunity of deferring it and having that further discussion with them, because I've got some concerns about the space standards, to be honest with you. If we want to make this scheme successful and work in the future, I think it needs to take into account the current sort of current climate in terms of home working, etc.
Right. Can I ask Mr. Aubrey to comment?
Yeah, I mean, I sympathise with Councillor Akhtar's view, but the fact is, I'll come back to what I said earlier, is that the scheme as submitted complies with our existing standards, and therefore we have no justification in planning terms to go back, given that it does comply, and we'd have absolutely no teeth to create an argument that they should be increasing the space, effectively reducing the number of dwellings, and increasing the space of each unit. We just would not have any justification for doing that. Having said that, I do sympathise with the underlying tenet of Councillor Akhtar's views, but we are where we are in terms of policy, I'm afraid.
I think as well we're trapped between viability here. If the developer did reduce the numbers, the scheme then wouldn't become viable. And I think, as Councillor Jake said, it's the sort of development that we do want to see in the town centre, and also to fulfil the shortage of properties that we do have in Oldham.
Yes, I mean, as Graham mentioned earlier, the scheme, in terms of its viability, it's absolutely on the margins. So reducing, or rather increasing the floor area and therefore reducing the number of flats would actually further reduce what is already a very, very marginal viability situation.
Have we got any further comments at all? I can't see anybody wanting to contribute. Therefore, could I move the recommendation of officers with the conditions applied, and a further one to make sure that there's adequate protection, visual protection around the bin area? Councillor Malik.
I'll second that, Chair.
Thank you. Is there any further comments? If we could then, I can't see any, if we could possibly move to a vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Akhtar, oh sorry, members will be asked to state whether they are for the proposal, against it or abstaining. Councillor Akhtar?
Abstaining.
Yeah. Councillor Davis?
For.
Councillor Gary?
For.
Councillor Gloucester?
Abstention, please.
Councillor Hewitt?
For.
Councillor Ibrahim?
For.
Councillor Jakes?
For.
Councillor Malik?
For.
Councillor Fithian?
For.
Councillor Sheldon?
For.
Councillor Serjean?
For.
Councillor Hartness, sorry I've missed you out again.
Abstain.
Thank you. And Councillor Dean?
For. And
so the application is approved, Chair.
thank you very much. Okay, that's approved. If we could go on to item 7, and that is just an update on appeals for members to note. Has anybody got any comment? No. Are we happy to note the
Noted, thanks.
appeals? Thanks very much. Okay, that's the whole of my agenda, and thank you very much for your attendance. Bye.
Thank you.